All right, so on your desks, you should have your notebook with this note glued in. You should have a calculator so that you can do the calculations. And we're going to begin to take this note. So again, anything that I write on the screen, you are copying out in your note. So today we're going to be talking about some basic rules about fractions. Today we're going to look at multiplying and dividing. Multiplying and dividing fractions, it is actually the easier operations to do rather than addition and subtraction. So we're just going to go over, because I'm going to be using these terms quite a bit in here. I have a fraction here. It says 3/4. So that's a fraction, 3/4. Each of these numbers represents something. So I have here, this top number here is our numerator. And my bottom number here is my denominator. I'm going to be, when I give my definitions and my instructions on how to perform adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, I'm going to be using these terms a lot, numerator, denominator. So you should have that copied out on your note. Something that is new, or maybe that you haven't really seen, negative fractions. We can have negative fractions, and they can be shown in three ways. So I'm going to show you three uh, different ways that you can actually write a negative fraction. So I'm going to take this 3/4 and just write it in three ways that is a negative fraction. So I can have -3/4. So notice that that 3 is negative. That is another way I can write this is 3/-4. And another way I can write that is a negative and then the 3/4. Okay, so again, all three of these things mean the same thing. Now, just with good mathematical form, this negative symbol here, down here at the bottom, we usually don't write a negative symbol in the denominator. We'll move that to the top. So when you're giving your final answers, you always want to move the negative to the numerator, or you'll have an answer like this with the negative out front. But all three things mean the exact same thing. Okay, so that's just dealing with negative fractions. So again, we have numerators, denominators, and then the negative fraction in three ways. So we're going to be filling in the blanks here. So multiplying fractions, maybe you haven't seen this in a while, which is why we are going to review it because we're going to be coming across it. So it says here, we can multiply fractions with any denominators. It doesn't matter what the denominators are, we can multiply them together. Okay, adding and subtracting is different. So our first step when we are multiplying the fractions, this is pretty straightforward. My first step here is I'm going to multiply the numerators. Step one, tell me what that's equal. Then I'm going to multiply the denominators together. And then in my third step, I'm going to reduce to lowest terms, and that's if it is possible. Okay, so multiplying, pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go through some examples here. We have 4 examples that we're going to go through. So here I have a fraction, and I'm going to multiply my numerators together. So I'm going to take 1 here, and I'm going to times it by 3. What does 1 times 3 give me? If you don't know that, I mean, you could always put it in your calculator. 1 times 3 gives you 3. Then over, I'm going to multiply my denominators together. So again, here I'm going to take 9 times 2. If you don't know that, it's okay. You can put it in your calculator. 9 times 2 gives you 18. Okay, now reducing a fraction. Reducing a fraction, I mean, if you're using my calculator, there is a fraction button that you can use. Your fraction button on your calculator looks something like this, A, B, C, where you would type in your numerator, hit the ABC button in your denominator, and then hit your equal sign, which would give you your fraction in lowest terms. I can show you how to use that. But again, what is your calculator doing? What do you need to do here? You need to find a number that you can divide, the biggest number that you can divide both the 3 and the 18 by. And what actually happens here is I'm going to take 3 and I can divide it by 3. What I do to the top, I do it to the bottoms because that gives me an equivalent fraction. When I take 3 divided by 3, that gives me 1. And when I do 18 divided by 3, that gives me 6. Okay, that would be it in lowest terms. And for all of our examples that we are going to do, I want you to write it in lowest terms always. So this would be your final answer. If you don't write it in lowest terms, you will lose half a mark. Okay, our second example. Now you're going to notice here I have 2 over 3 times 4. Well, now you may be saying, but 4 isn't a fraction. Well, we can actually take any whole number and make it a fraction by putting it over 1. 4 divided by 1 still gives me 4. I'm just writing it as a fraction. So what am I going to do? I'm going to multiply my numerators together. 2 times 4 gives me 8 over 3 times 1 gives me 3. Now, this is an improper fraction. You will write all of your answers as an improper fraction. We are not going to be writing it as a mixed fraction. So what is a mixed fraction? You will have a mixed fraction would look something like this. This would be, you don't have to write it, but it would be, 2 and then 2/3 would be your mixed fraction there. But I don't want to write, we don't write in mixed fractions for this piece here. There's sometimes that it's appropriate when like measurement, but right now we're not going to be doing that. So again, this is what we do. Now, if I look here, what number can both divide 8 and 3? The only number that divides that together is 1. That's the only one that's common to each other. So this is actually in lowest terms. So that is my final answer. My next example here, again, I'm going to start off with my numerators here. So I have a negative sign, not a big deal. 8 times negative 3. So you would, again, type that into your calculator. 8 times negative 3 gives you negative 24 over, I take the denominator. So those bottom numbers, 9 times 4. 9 times 4 gives me 36. Okay, now I want to reduce this into its lowest terms. Again, you can use your calculator to help you for lowest terms, but you want to definitely find the number that divides evenly into both of those. And the number that divides evenly into both of those is 12. So I can take 24 divided by 12 gives me negative 2. 36 divided by 12 gives me positive 3. So your final answer for this is negative 2 over 3. And again, if you were using your fraction button on your calculator, you would type in negative 24, hit your ABC button. You may even have a button that looks like this, where you have a square, a line, and a square. You would hit that button as well, over 36, and it would give you negative 2 over 3. Okay, from our last example here, again, pretty straightforward. I take 2 times 1, and multiply my numerators together, which gives me 2. All over my denominators, 3 times negative 4 gives me negative 12. Okay, so it's pretty basic. Multiply the numerators together, multiply the denominators together. Now I'm going to reduce this into lowest terms. So again, I have to find a number that I can divide both top and bottom by. the largest number, and that largest number is 2. So I'm going to divide by 2, divide by 2. What do I get? 2 divided by 2 gives me 1. Negative 12 divided by 2 gives me negative 6. Now notice here that the negative 6 is on the bottom. I want you to get used to writing your answers with the negative sign on the numerator. So we can just rewrite that as that. Always keep the negative sign in the numerator. Okay, so now we're going to go into the next operation, which is dividing fractions. We can divide fractions by rewriting as a multiplication problem. Okay, so it's actually kind of weird. We don't actually divide our fractions together. We actually end up multiplying by what we call the reciprocal. So I'm going to go through the steps for this. The first fraction, we leave that first fraction alone. The first fraction stays the same. Okay, step 2, we take that division sign and we change it. The division becomes multiplication. Okay, so first fraction stays the same. I leave that alone. Step 2, division becomes multiplication. Step 3, I'm going to flip. So that's the non-math word that I'm going to use, which actually means take the reciprocal. Of the second fraction. So we flip it. So the denominator becomes the numerator becomes the denominator. I'm going to go over some examples. And then step 4 says follow the rules of multiplication. Well, what are the rules of multiplication? You can look at the top of your note. We have the multiplying fractions, those rules there that you are going to follow. So again, we actually take division, we make it a multiplication problem. First fraction stays the same, division becomes multiplication. Flip the second fraction, follow the rules for multiplication. So let's go into these next examples. So step 1, the first fraction stays the same. 2, oh, didn't want that pen, 2 over 5. Step 2, the division sign becomes multiplication, times. I'm going to flip the second fraction. Here's my second fraction. I'm going to flip it. So instead of writing 4 over 9, I write 9 over 4. Okay, so what do I do here? Now I follow my rules of multiplication. Well, what do I have to do? I take my numerators and I multiply them together. 2 times 9 gives me 18. Over. Now I multiply my denominators together. 5 times 4 gives me 20. Great. My next step again is I'm going to reduce my fraction into lowest terms. So I'm going to find out here what number can be divided by 18 and 20 to the highest number that can be divided by 18 and 20. And that number is 2. So I'm going to divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2. When I do that, I can take 18 divided by 2, which gives me 9, over 20 divided by 2, which gives me 10. So my final answer for this is 9 over 10. So you always, always, always want to reduce fractions when possible. Okay, for B. Again, step 1, first fraction stays the same. Step 2, division becomes multiplication. Step 3, flip the fraction, 7 over 6. Okay, now follow the rules for multiplication. What do I have to do? Multiply the numerators together. 1 times 7 gives me 7 over 2 times 6 gives me 12. I'm going to look at this. Is there a number that divides in evenly to both 7 and 12? No, there is not. So that is my final answer in lowest terms. Okay, our final two examples. So I have now, again, here is another, I have a negative symbol here. That's a negative symbol. So remember, you can write the negative symbol out front or you can write it in with the numerator, either or. But I have a whole number. Well, what do I do when I have a whole number? I always put it over 1. So I will write this as negative 3, because my first fraction stays the same. I'm just moving that negative sign with the numerator. Not a big deal. Second step, change division to multiplication. Third step, flip the fraction. This is 3 over 1 as a fraction. So now I'm going to multiply that by 1 over 3. Now I follow my rules for multiplication. I take my numerators, I multiply them together. Negative 3 times 1 gives me negative 3 over 15 times, or sorry, 5 times 3 gives me 15. Excuse me. And my final step here is I reduce. Well, what number can I divide both the numerator and the denominator by? I can divide by 3, which actually gives me, I'm going to write it here on the bottom, negative 1 over 5. Again, if I know, understand that writing fractions in those terms can be tricky. You can definitely use your calculator to help you out with it. That's okay at this point, as long as you understand that it has to go there. And if you're having difficulties with this and your friends can't help you out, when I come back, I will definitely show you where that button is. Okay, our last example here for the day, it says 4 over negative 7 divided by 1 over 2. Well, what do I have to do here? I have a negative sign in the denominator. I'm actually going to move that to the top. So I'm going to take negative 4 over 7. It's the exact same thing. So did I change the first fraction? No. Step 2, change the middle sign or change it to multiplication. And step 3, I flip the second fraction. Now what do? I follow the rules of multiplication, multiply my numerators together. We can type it into our calculator. Negative 4 times 2 gives me negative 8 over 7 times 1 gives me 7. Okay, so that is multiplying and dividing fractions. So you are going to work on the worksheet that will be given out to you. If you have any questions, you should be checking your answers. If you have any questions, please star them and let me know.